In September 1944, as the situation at the Eastern Front was rapidly deteriorating, the idea of forming a new SS division emerged. It was to be composed mainly of ethnic Germans from the Bácska and Bánát regions, which once belonged to Hungary, but were now shared between three countries: occupied Hungary, occupied Serbia, and Romania. At the same time, the 23rd SS Division Kama, also known as Croatian No. 2, was disbanded, its German cadre was redirected to the new formation, and in early October, SS Oberfuhrer Gustav Lombard was appointed divisional commander. A Type 1944 infantry division was being formed, for now with 1,000 rifles from the Kama division and German volunteers. Many of these men were volunteers in name only. Once Hungary was occupied by German forces, a third round of recruitment began, this time with no Hungarian resistance. By late August, 42,000 men were mustered. Even members of the Hungarian army were forcibly taken over. They were used to form the Horst Wessel and Maria Theresa SS divisions, but they were followed by many more in the Batschka in September and October. In many locations, all men born before 1927 had to appear for induction. They were then assigned to barracks in Zombor and nearby villages. Uniforms and boots were in short supply. Training was rushed and short due to these circumstances. The division was to have 3 infantry and 1 artillery regiment, a reconnaissance fusilier battalion, a tank hunter Abteilung, a pioneer, a communication, and the usual supply and services units. It was mostly horse-drawn, with a few vehicles and no heavy weapons. The officers and NCOs were mostly Reich Germans from the Kama division. Some of them came from the Wehrmacht or the Hungarian or Slovak army. The enlisted men were ethnic Germans from this region. In October, more arrived. Some were allegedly taken from the refugee columns that were moving westwards, while others came from the Heimatschutz militia that was securing the same columns. Even some Bosnians from Kama stayed with them for a while before they deserted or were moved to the west. Some units, like the pioneers and tank hunters, were moved to Pécs for training, but the rest soon had to be moved as well, because the front was rapidly approaching the Bánát. As I mentioned in a previous video, the Soviet troops pushed Hungarian Third Army out of Arad in late September, and they also reached the Tisa and Danube rivers, approaching Belgrade to the south. Romania and Bulgaria switched sides. They also sent their forces to this section of the front, so the situation was getting worse. A Kampfgruppe from the Brandenburg Division, the Assault Regiment Rhodes, a Stugabteilung, and Luftwaffe flag units arrived, but these were too weak to hold the line. By mid-October, the Bánát was lost, so the ethnic German population and the 31st SS Division, still under formation, had to be moved to Baranya County across the Danube. German and Hungarian units had to fight both the Red Army and local partisan units, suffering considerable casualties to snipers and ambushes. Hungarian Third Army could only slow down the Soviets. Kecskemét and Szeged were given up. The combat-ready parts of the 31st SS Division were assembled in Kampfgruppe Szér and fought alongside 3 Hungarian divisions and parts of the Brandenburg Division, but there was no coherent line of resistance. Regent Horthy's October 15 proclamation regarding Hungary's withdrawal from the war did not change much, although more Hungarian soldiers defected, along with ethnic Germans. Szabadka and Belgrade fell, Kampfgruppe Szér retreated to Kiskunhalas, then it crossed the Danube at Baja on the 19th of October. The division's units were quartered in Baranya County, in the so-called Swabian Turkey, with many German villages around the city of Pécs. Here they no longer had to expect partisan attacks. More young ethnic German recruits arrived, along with uniforms and equipment, and training continued. The front reached the Danube, so even though they were not ready for action, more units of the 31st were sent there, to the area between Dunaszekcső, Mohács and Vörösmart, to prevent a major breakthrough. The division now had almost 15,000 men, but only half of them had weapons, so their chances were not great, to say the least. The line was quiet until mid-November, but after Soviet attacks in the direction of Budapest failed, the 57th Army launched its offensive and crossed the Danube at Apatin, and this bridgehead could not be eliminated even with Hungarian and German reinforcements. Fighting continued for days, during which Harry Paletta's Stug Battery 1007 and 3 Hungarian flag batteries were of invaluable help, destroying many tanks and vehicles. The Soviets regrouped and in late November broke out, pushing back the 31st, the Brandenburg Division, and the 44th Infantry Division Hoch- und Deutschmeister, although by then both sides were exhausted. Mohács soon fell, after which the 31st was torn apart, its 3 infantry regiments retreated north or northwestwards, while some men simply deserted, mainly to get back to their homeland, which was now under Soviet occupation. The majority tried to get to Pécsvárad, but soon this area fell as well, so remnants of the division were 80 kilometers apart from Siklós to Szekszárd, with no communication links between them. More arms and equipment arrived, but the 31st was no longer able to put up a serious fight. In early December, Kaposvár fell, the Soviets reached Lake Balaton, while the 31st was withdrawn from the front and transported to Slovenia for reorganization. 11,000 men were gathered, some Transylvanian Germans were added to them, while the pioneer and tank hunter units were marched to Bohemia for training along with the artillery regiment. The 31st was then converted to a Type 1945 infantry division, but the 3rd Infantry Regiment and the Fusilier unit could not be refilled. These were later added in Silesia, using men from other formations. Heavy weapons finally arrived, they received more training, but they occasionally had to deal with local partisan attacks and an increasingly hostile population. In mid-February, the division was transported to Silesia, suffering some casualties on the way due to Allied strafing and bombing. The missing 3rd Grenadier Regiment was added by amalgamating the Brixen SS Police Regiment from South Tyrol, while the Hungarian Szálasi Waffen-SS Grenadier Battalion replaced the Fusilier unit. By then, Breslau was under attack. Not even 3 panzer divisions could fully stop the Soviet advance. 17th Army needed reinforcements, so the 31st SS Division was directed to the Jauer area, now with its own artillery and more weapons, as these were slowly arriving. 12,000 men arrived at the Silesian front in March, which was relatively quiet as the main Soviet thrust was in the direction of Berlin. They participated in the fighting at Lauban and Strigau, then had to stop Soviet counterattacks near Strelen. A last attack was then performed in early May at Zopten, but then orders arrived that all units should stop fighting and surrender to the nearest Allied force. Most German units, especially Waffen-SS troops, wanted to reach the American line that was supposed to be at Pilsen, so a long march commenced towards Frankenstein, then to Braunau and Glatz to avoid Soviet captivity. While a few managed to reach the nearest American unit, or Reich territory, most of them ran into Czech insurgents, who, after 6 long years of collaboration or neutrality, were eager to take revenge on the retreating Germans. Thousands were beaten, tortured, and eventually killed. Thousands more died later in the march towards the collection camps, where cholera and typhus were rampant. Members of the Waffen-SS were being hunted down, so they tried to hide their identity by switching to Wehrmacht uniforms, scraping off their tattoos, and assuming a false identity, but this did not always work. A lucky few managed to escape. The rest ended up in ditches, hanging from street lamps, or in collection camps, from where they were transported to the Soviet Union for years of hard labor. A lot more died after the surrender than in the earlier fights in Hungary and in Silesia. Some of those who managed to hide were later denounced in East Germany and ended up in prison or at a police station where they were treated not very kindly, to say the least. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I plan to make more videos on other units, both German and Hungarian, in the near future, so stay tuned.